Welcome to your 12-minute HR lesson. Today, I'm going to explain to you how you are Batman's boss. I'm not a big comic book fan, and I'm not a big superhero movie fan, but strangely enough, you'll find me talking about them a lot. I find the narrative potential and the character growth of superheroes really interesting. In the same way you might find a music person really interested in scores, I'm someone who's really interested in how the writers wrote what they wrote and what they were trying to tell us when they wrote that. And the medium of superheroes is a really useful and effective one. One of the things that I found really interesting in the last 20 years is how much Marvel has completely overtaken DC. And that's been over, we're talking 20 years now, whenever Iron Man came out, how much the Marvel bank of superheroes have gone from the apples of the 1990s, barely hanging on, almost dead in terms of popular opinion. In the same way that Apple leapfrogged Microsoft, Marvel leapfrogged DC and the DC superheroes. Now, I'm not going to talk about the Marvel superheroes. What I find really interesting is the DC superheroes and why they couldn't really get off the ground, except for Batman. So let's talk about Superman. I find Superman really interesting because of how uninteresting he is. Superman, if you think about it, is quite a boring character. There's not much to do with him. He is all good, all powerful, and the only interesting flaw that he has is kryptonite, which is essentially just a weakness. That's just a way for a normal human like Lex Luthor to bring him low, to drop him from 10 out of 10 of power down to 1 out of 10 of power. Now, as a narrative device, that's pretty boring. And that's a limitation of every movie they've ever made about Superman. And I hear good things about the new one. I haven't seen it, but I probably will go see it because they've dealt with this. How does he grow? The most you can do with Superman is he's a fish out of water. He is a good alien struggling to deal with the complexities, fragilities, and conflicts of humans. There's not much to work with when it comes to character growth. Now compare Superman to Batman. Batman's really interesting. Batman is the most popular superhero of all time. And you could say that's partially because of the Joker, partially because of the villains. He has the best staple of villains against him. But Batman as a character, there's a lot to work with. So why? What is so interesting about Batman? It's because Batman is two people. He is one soul, two people. He is both at the same time Bruce Wayne with his privilege and his troubled background and his motivation, but also the facade that he needs to present. Also Batman with his rules and his limitations and him trying to do justice outside of the law. There's so much more to work with Batman than there is with Superman. And perhaps the most interesting question is that question of how you have two people within the same body vying with each other. Not dissimilar to the Hulk, but let's not talk about the Hulk. That's a story that keeps coming back within literature. Two people, one soul. It's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but it's also Mrs. Doubtfire. It's even Hannah Montana, and I've never seen it, but that's my understand. Hannah Montana has a similar sort of Gem and the hologram sort of situation going on. The story is how do we balance two versions of ourselves? How do we balance two competing sets of priorities? And the question for you is, how does that turn up in the workplace? So now let's bring that to a real world situation. And this is a case that I wasn't directly involved in. It was a case that I read. It's an employment law case, wasn't that long ago. But unfortunately, the element that I found really interesting, the narrative idea, wasn't something that the court specifically answered, because what the question was turned around was a point of law, not the actual substance of the case, which is sometimes you get in employment law. You read something, you see something really interesting, you're like, oh, I hope they answer that question, and they don't. But so be it. Anyway, this is the scenario. So we've got an employee who's a night shift worker. 5 days a week, midnight to late, working night shift. But they were coming home, they were picking up their child, they were doing the family things in the morning, going to the gym, getting some sleep, getting up, picking up their kids, afternoon tea, homework, dinner, family time, off to work. Fine. No problem with that, except for the fact that then when they got to work, they were sleeping on the job for a couple of hours, because the reality is they were only getting 4 hours sleep during the day. Now, unfortunately, the courts didn't answer the specific question that I thought was so interesting in this, is the extent to which the employer could say, hang on, you're shortchanging us. We're employing you 40 hours a week. We're paying you this. You've got other stuff going on in your life that's important. It's not that we don't think it's important. It's not that we don't agree. But you're trying to be two things at the same time, and you've been shortchanging us without telling us. And that is something an employer could fairly have a real problem with. What I found is that most employers would probably be sympathetic to the circumstances, only up to a certain point. And there are probably two things that, to my mind, had it been me, really would have kicked it over the line, in which I would have said, no, hang on. That's beyond the pale of reasonableness. One is that you haven't come to us and said, look, I'm really struggling, what can we do? You've taken and now you're asking permission. You've shortchanged being caught and are now saying, oh, look, I've been really struggling to do something. So asking for forgiveness after the fact is quite different. The other thing that, to my mind, I really would have gone, no, that's too much. That's beyond a level of reasonableness that can be tolerated, is that going to the gym during the day. Now, going to the gym's important. Keeping healthy is important. That's not in contention. But the employer is entitled to say, hang on, you're shortchanging me, and I never agreed to being shortchanged. So what's the takeaway? You're here for a lesson. You're not here to talk about Batman. You're not even here to do night shift. The purpose of these lessons is not for you to know what to do differently. This isn't an instruction manual. This is a little bit of insight for you to see something that was in front of you beforehand that you may not have spotted, so that hopefully next time you can spot it. This is what these lessons are. I'm here to help you think and see what you might be missing. What we're essentially talking about is the two parts of our lives. The Batman of our lives is trying to be two things simultaneously. Two people, one soul. That's what being an employee is. It is who I need to be when I'm in the workplace and who I am when I'm outside of the workplace. When I'm at work, I'm Batman. When I'm outside of work, I'm Bruce Wayne. The night shift worker is a good example of someone who was struggling to be both, and how the employer was forced to say, hang on, no, you need to be who we need you to be. You can't not be that person because of this balance. I'm all for work-life balance. I don't have a fundamental problem with work-life balance because it is hard. Everybody struggles with it. The difficulty that we have with work-life balance is that there's need to do and nice to do's. And some of the time, what we need people to do is weighed up against what they need to do outside of work. And that's the fundamental tension of an employment relationship. How much do I need to give? How much do I get to take? That's both the employer and the employee. That balance and that deal is essentially at the fundamental question of all employment relationships. And what we can probably fairly push back on is where an employee's work need to do is being compromised for their preference of what they would like to do. You may feel differently, but to my mind, going to the gym is a good to do, but that needs to be compromised against the work need to do. Getting work-life balance is tricky, but everybody has to do it, and everybody is doing it. There's no one out there, until we get robots, there is nobody who is just an employee. Everybody is doing this. Often the subtext between an employee conflict that we find ourselves in, where we have conflict between the employer and the employee, is the employee trying to balance their obligations and their person outside of work against their obligations within work. We need to be reasonable, we need to be accommodating where possible, but on the other hand, if things need to be done, they need to be done. If they've signed a contract, we are entitled to enforce that contract. And often that is the subtext of what we're looking at. An employee who is burning the candles at both ends and compromising their obligations that they've agreed to. They have signed a contract that say that they will do X, Y, and Z, and they are shortchanging us on Z because there is something outside of the work they are prioritizing over us. Each circumstances are different. I'm not going to give you a list of this is more important than that, but often that is the question that we are asking ourselves. Are they compromising the contract with us because of something that they would prefer to be doing, something more important to them, and are we entitled to say, stop, no, you're paid to be Batman, you need to work the night shift. You're still here. You made it to the end. You made it through 12 minutes. Congrats, you're well done. It's probably because I promised you'd be Batman's boss. You're probably a bit disappointed in that. I can only apologize. I can offer you a full refund. And having said that, when it comes to the price, these are free lessons. We're happy to share them. In return, if you do want to pay us back a little bit, perhaps the easiest way that you could do, obviously the best thing we'd like you to do is bring us in as consultants and come and see our courses and lavish cash upon us, but we're not going to complain if that doesn't happen. If you do want to pay us back in a little way, share us, like us, spread us around so that other people know about this. This is the way in which we get ourselves out there and we get people to kind of see and hear what we're all about. So if you want to pay us back, if you want to say thank you, share us, like us, however you found us, get us out there.